So you're ready to learn how to paint Charizard. The first step is to do the sketch. Now, if you do need help with the sketch, I am going to show the process here, and I'm going to start at the bottom with sort of that portion of a circle, just top part of a circle, but you can skip ahead if you don't need this. You can also remember that you can change the playback speed. I increased the playback speed just so we can get through the video a little bit faster, but you can pause or turn it down to whatever you need to work best for you. So you may have noticed, but I do like to try and work kind of symmetrically. If I do something on the left, I go ahead and try and do it on the right. That way I get the correct shape and size and positioning all at one time by going back and forth between those elements. And even for the parts that aren't perfectly symmetrical, it does help for me to kind of be able to compare what they look like and make sure I'm doing them at the right angles. The truth is, mistakes happen in art, and that's okay. We can erase these pencil marks, or we can paint over them. We can erase or paint over any mistakes we make with the actual paint itself. It's all okay. That's just part of the process. Alright, once you have your sketch completely done and to your liking, we can go ahead and start with painting. And for this first step, we are going to use various different blues. I have 2 different blues on my palette, a white. I will get some black here in a second because I forgot to get it from the start. And you are going to also use just regular cotton balls. And we're going to use a cotton ball to dab on this sort of galaxy effect. Now, even though my canvas is already black, anything that you want to be dark or black, you need to still add black paint to. So this doesn't make a huge difference. You could start with a white canvas. It doesn't change anything. What I'm doing though is I'm just coming in and adding some black and blue and white and just blending it together with this dabbing motion. And it's okay if you get a little bit over your lines, but try and stay in the background for this. While simultaneously filling in all of that sky background or galaxy background. Realistically, the amount of blue that you put or the colors of blue that you put are completely up to you. I really did like this kind of darker, almost purpley blue, and I ended up blending that in. Something I did forget to do from the very beginning that I went in later was underneath his wings at the very bottom. There are 2 bits of the galaxy showing through that I missed, so make sure you dab that as well. Once you're happy with that, it is time for the stars, and this is the part everyone loves to do. You're going to take a big paintbrush and some white paint, and you're going to add quite a bit of water to it. So just like dip your big paintbrush in your water jar and then bring it straight into your white paint until you kind of see a few bubbles. It's going to be fairly liquidy, kind of like milk or maybe a little bit slightly thicker. And then you're going to take just your forefinger and flick it in the direction that you want it. This is messy, so try and get it just where your painting is. But if you are working on a nice surface that doesn't have something protecting it, then I do recommend putting down some newspaper or plastic, something that can get paint on it. And if you can't do this outside away from your good stuff, that's what you should do. As you can see here, my next step was to go ahead and get out my red, orange, and yellow paint. Red and yellow do make orange though, so if you just want to get those colors, that's totally fine. My orange actually was not a very high quality, so I ended up mixing my orange for the most part of this. It's not going to make a huge difference which orange you choose at this point because we're just going to be putting down a base and then we're going to paint over top of this. But what is important is that you are working slow whenever you get towards the edges, or you're trying to make a straight line at your edges. So I have a flat medium-sized brush and I am using the edge of the bristles to make a nice clean line. You can go a little bit faster if you're not having to worry about the edge of your line or staying in the lines. But whenever you are close to those edges, that's the most important thing to remember for this stage. Just as a sort of side note tip here for you, if you have a color that maybe is not quite thick enough and it's showing through the canvas, you can always add a little bit of white to your mixture. And that's what I did here to make it slightly more opaque. Because like I said, this is the base, so I'm even using some different shades of orange. Not going to be a huge deal when it's all said and done. The only thing that I do want you to do is make sure you are mixing in some white to your orange to make a lighter orange when we get to that sort of circular part at the bottom, or partial circle at the bottom where his chest is. Just so that we can keep track of where the bottom of the face is, like where that line is, to differentiate the two portions of this painting, I am going to use a slightly different orange or slightly darker orange for the face. And again, I'm just getting this kind of background layer in here. I am trying to leave some essentially guidelines for myself of where my pencil marks are. So I am painting within certain sections and leaving some parts black, or if your canvas were white, leaving those parts unpainted so that I know where to add the lines in later. Again, I can't reiterate enough how important it is to make sure you're working slow whenever you're trying to stay within lines or have really clean edges to your paint. Also, the amount of paint you have on your brush is super important. You don't want to have so much paint that you're creating mountains. It's really important to wash your brush really well and then dry it really well before this next step. We're going to mix yellow and blue together to make a green. I'm having a little bit more green than yellow. That way it's a nice dark green for the base of the inside of the wings. After you're done with that step, go ahead again and wash your brush really well and dry it really well. But we are going to switch to the tiny brush. A tiny round brush is what I'm using to start adding in a base for some of the detail work, like the teeth coming out in the front and the eyes. We've got an outer edge of white on the eyes, an inner edge of white, and then it's blue for the iris and black for the pupil. Anytime you're switching between colors, you want to make sure you're washing your brush really well and then drying it really well. It can be a little damp. You just don't want to have a big puddle of water for a couple different reasons. One is it's going to water down the paint that you're trying to apply, and it's not going to be thick enough. It's not going to coat and cover as you want it to. Secondly, because it might wipe away the paint that you've already applied to your canvas. So that can be a useful tip for whenever you make a mistake, is you can take a clean wet brush and kind of rub away like a sponge the messed up part. And I do that later on in the video because, again, mistakes are part of the process and it's totally fine. You just have to remember when to use that tool and not let it create more mistakes. Next, to give our Pokemon some value, we are going to be mixing two different types of oranges. So we're going to do a more dark, vibrant orange by adding more red. So think of it like proportions. We got more red than yellow, or at least more red than we have in our lighter orange. So you have two different oranges that we're going to work with for now. And I'm going to start with the lighter orange and start adding the highlights anywhere the light would be hitting. And again, this is going to be on some edges, on some lines, so we want nice clean strokes. Make sure and work very slowly. All right, it's just about time for us to start using the dark orange that we created. Just like we did with the lighter orange, where we applied the lighter orange to the highlighted areas, we are going to apply this darker orange to the darker areas, as if our image only had two values, light and dark. Obviously, we're going to come back in and add some more color in here, but this is, again, just creating that next level base that is starting to separate out the form of our Charizard. So again, work really slowly whenever you are next to the edge of the lines, but you can also, whenever you get right up next to your lighter orange, you can kind of blend the paint together there, right where the two meet, if your paint is still wet. That being said, it's important to work really quickly whenever you are working with acrylic paint because it dries super fast. And in our next step, we are going to be blending some more orange and putting the tiniest bit, tiny bit of black into that mixture to make a sort of brownish orange. And this is going to be truly our darkest value. So I'm going to go back in on this body of our Charizard and add in this darkest part here. So you can follow along with me, slow it down if you need to. But this is completing our value scale on our Pokemon. Next, I'm going to come in and do the same thing with the face of the Charizard. Some of my lighter parts I will have to go back in and make brighter, but I took that darker orange that I originally made to put that base on the darker areas, and then you'll see in a second here I'm going to go in and add the brown orange again, and then lighten up those areas that needed brightening. The reason I like to work on the body first and then the face is because, like I said before, the paint dries so quickly that by working on a section at a time, it allows me to have a better chance that I'm going to be able to blend my colors as I'm working because the paint will remain wet and blendable. I want to take this time to sort of point out and map out exactly where we are putting these highlights and why, and putting our shadows and why. Now, when I say highlights, I am, of course, referring to this brighter orange, this yellowy orange that we've created. And when I say shadows, I am talking about the darker oranges that we created. So starting at the top of the head and in between the horns, or the horns themselves, you can see that the yellowy or highlighted parts are the innermost parts of the horn and the top of the head. And that highlight kind of fades down in a triangular or downward pointing triangular type shape that eventually blends into our darker shadow. And that goes into a sort of valley in between the two eyebrow bones. Those eyebrow bones, in order to make them look like they are standing out, have to be highlighted. Anything that protrudes or stands out is going to catch the light, and that's what creates that highlight. So we have that brighter yellow on the eyebrow bones. Similarly, we've got the brighter yellow or brighter orange on the cheekbones that are directly underneath the eyes. And that leads us to the bridge of the nose, which is that sort of flat rectangular part that sticks out on the nose itself, the snout, and the actual nostrils. The nostrils have highlights as well. But if we want something to truly look 3D, it's not enough just to have highlights. We also need to have those shadows where they belong. So sort of on the edge of the face, it gets darker, the edge of the horns on the left and right sides, underneath the cheekbones, and to the left and right of the snout, and at the very base of the nose, since it goes back in space towards the body. We need to have that bottom part of the nose be in shadow. If your colors are not blending well because the paint's dry, you can always come in and add whatever color you need of the other paint that has already dried so that you can create a nice blend in between the two. Next, I'm going to come back in with my tiny brush, my small round brush, and start tweaking some of those detailed areas like the teeth and the eyes. Being a little bit more careful now since we've already got our base dry. Just creating that correct shape. Something I did that I had to go back over and fix later was whenever I did my blue for the eyes, I accidentally mixed it with some of the black because my black paint wasn't quite dry yet. So if you do make a mistake, you can again just wash it off with either your wet paintbrush, or you can let it dry and come back and paint over top of it, which is what I did on some of these areas. When you're ready for the next step, we are going to be taking that small brush and doing some outlining. What's important here is we are going to be making a sort of looser black pigment, and we are going to be tracing around parts that are dry. So that left part of the eye, it's kind of hard to tell in the video, but it was a little bit too wet and it made a gray because the white was still wet. So make sure your paint is dry before you try and do this. But add just a touch of water, like dip your little brush into your water jar and add that to the black to make it loose, a little bit looser, so that you can have nice clean lines that flow a lot easier with your brush. Go ahead and follow along with me for where I'm adding these lines on the face and tracing parts of the body. For this stage, you're probably going to have to reload your brush quite frequently, which just means re-dipping it in the black paint. Just if you start seeing the paint kind of skipping spaces over the canvas and not covering completely, that's when you know that you need more paint. But you don't want to overload it either and get your lines too thick, or again have mountains of paint. That's not what we're going for here. Before starting outlining the bottom of the body, I do have to go ahead and add that second layer or second coat of paint on both the wings and that lighter tan part of the stomach or chest. So if you don't have your light orange still made, go ahead and mix some more and put another coat on that partial circle at the bottom of the canvas. And then go ahead and mix your green again. Again, I wanted this to be a very dark green, so more blue than yellow proportionally whenever I did the wings. And I did the second coat of that green as well. Once that's done, and if your paint is dry enough, you can go ahead and move on to the outlining stage of the bottom portion of the body. As we're getting closer to the end, this is when I'm going to come in here and just add a few more of the expressive lines and tweak anything that needs to be tweaked or fixed. Like some of my highlights, I needed to brighten up a bit. My eyes were very messy, so I needed to come in and do some corrections there. For the eyes, you kind of have like a letter U of blue that blocks out where the pupil is. And then there is a shadow from the eyebrow bone that creates kind of that cutoff of additional black. But as you can see, I go in and add a few more black lines on the face and just kind of some squiggly lines on the wings. These things just give it a little bit more of a rough texture, a little bit more expressive as well on the face. Another thing to keep in mind about acrylic paint is that it dries darker than it looks when it's wet. So that's why I'm coming back in here and bringing out some more of the highlights on the face that once they dried, I didn't feel were quite bright enough. I wanted to have those cheekbones and protruding parts of the face really nice and bright. And I even lightened up the very top of the wing bones as well. I don't know about you guys, but I think this is looking fantastic. We've got a lot of really nice dramatic lighting, the opposing warm versus cool colors in our foreground and background. So honestly, you could stop here if you wanted, but I'm going to give you an optional last step if you would like, and that is to add some wisps of flame around our Charizard. So to do this, I'm going to start with my medium-sized brush, medium flat brush, and load pure red paint onto it, and I'm going to be adding these sort of wavy lines. They're not real precise and they've got varied amounts of them that kind of group together, but they're wisps of flame. So think of it like anything in nature needs a lot of variety. You don't want to make them too perfect or too evenly spaced or like a pattern. You want them to be kind of wild, like they would if you had a normal just fire existing in nature. Then to get the flame effect, we need to get progressively lighter. So over top of your red, you're going to take your small brush and you're going to add straight yellow kind of in the center of each of these wiggly lines or marks. And you want to do this until there's only a slightly little bit of red showing from the outside. Then again, we're going to take our next step and get that yellow even lighter, adding some white to it and mix it on your palette so you have a very light yellow. Again, go in the center of all these marks with that light yellow. And then the last step is to use a pure white. And this mimics fire in the way that it's like so bright that you can't even see a color. And that pure white should be right in the middle. Once you're happy with your flames, you can go ahead and sign your name at the bottom or top or wherever your heart desires. You can sign your name on your new Charizard masterpiece. Thanks for following along with me. If you liked it, hit that thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button. Thanks again.